Imagine a civilization that sprawled across 1 million square kilometers. I mean, that's bigger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. We're talking about a world of perfectly planned cities, sanitation systems that were way ahead of their time, and these bustling, complex trade routes. Now, imagine it all just vanishing from history, its language unreadable, its rulers totally unknown, leaving behind this giant puzzle that has kept archaeologists scratching their heads for a century. Well, this is the story of the Indus Valley Civilization, a lost world that we're only just beginning to piece together. And boom, right there, that's the central paradox, isn't it? That's the question that's going to drive everything we talk about today. You know, this was an age of god-kings and pharaohs, of emperors building these massive monuments to themselves. But the Harappans, they chose a completely different path. They managed to create this incredibly complex, orderly, and huge society, all without the kind of top-down, absolute rule we see basically everywhere else in the ancient world. So how on earth did they do it? That's the big mystery we're going to try and unpack. I mean, just look at this map for a second. We're not talking about some small little kingdom tucked away somewhere. No way. This civilization stretched all the way from Afghanistan down into India and across to the Iranian border. Its heartland was in modern-day Pakistan and Western India. For an entire society this massive to flourish for centuries and then just fade from human memory, that's staggering. It wasn't until the 1920s that excavations at sites like Harappa finally brought it all back into the light. All right, so let's jump right into that first big mystery head on. If there were no kings, who was calling the shots? This idea just completely turns our usual model of how ancient societies worked on its head. The leading theory is, well, it's something that sounds remarkably modern. Instead of one single ruler, all the evidence suggests that power was held by committees or councils. These were probably made up of wealthy merchants, maybe some priests, or respected community elders. So think of it less like a monarchy and more like a board of directors for a city. Power was spread out. It was based on some kind of process and agreement, not just the whims of one guy. And the crucial thing here is that this wasn't chaos. It was a totally different kind of order, a highly organized, collective way of running things that really challenges our assumptions about the ancient world. And this chart really shows you just how unique they were. In Mesopotamia, you had priest kings building these gigantic ziggurats and palaces to show off their power. In Egypt, pharaohs were busy building pyramids. But in the Indus Valley, we find none of that. 0 identifiable palaces, no grand royal tombs overflowing with treasure. The clues point towards a powerful merchant class being the ones in charge, and their focus seems to have been on trade and public works, not personal glory. Which, of course, leads to the perfect question. If all that energy and labor and wealth wasn't being funneled into making some king look good, where did it go? Well, the answer is just as impressive, and honestly, probably a lot more useful for the average person. It went into building some of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. Which brings us to their cities. Because the answer to that question reveals this obsession with engineering and planning that you just wouldn't see matched in most parts of the world for literally thousands of years. The amount of forethought here is just remarkable. These weren't cities that just grew messy and chaotic over time. Nope, they were planned from the very beginning. The streets were laid out first in a super precise grid pattern with everything at right angles, and only then were the houses built along them. You can see this clear division. You've got the elevated fortified citadel, which was for public buildings and maybe ceremonies, and then the huge organized lower town where everybody lived. This two-part structure is a classic feature of their cities. This number, this simple ratio, this might be one of the most incredible clues we have to understanding this entire civilization. 1 to 2 to 4. So what does it mean? It's the ratio of their bricks' thickness to width. And get this wasn't just in one city. This exact same standardized brick was used across hundreds of sites, spanning that entire massive territory we saw on the map earlier. That implies a centralized system of measurement and production on a scale that is just mind-boggling. While the Egyptians were mostly using sun-dried mud bricks, the Harappans were mass-producing these high-quality fire-baked bricks. This level of standardization, it just speaks volumes about their unity and their organization. And their engineering genius did not stop with bricks. This sanitation system is just brilliant. Let's walk through it. Okay, so first, every single house had a drain that emptied into a little cesspit, which let all the solid waste settle at the bottom. The water waste then flowed out into covered drains that ran along the main streets. And here's the best part. These drains had removable covers, which means the whole system was designed not just to work, but to be cleaned and maintained. This focus on public health was basically unheard of in the ancient world. In the citadel of Mohenjo-Daro sits this absolute masterpiece, the Great Bath. It's this huge rectangular tank, perfectly built with those baked bricks and sealed with natural tar to be completely watertight. It was surrounded by a corridor. It had side rooms, maybe for changing. This wasn't some public swimming pool. Archaeologists are pretty sure it was used for important group rituals, like a sacred public space that really highlights their focus on community and water purification. Okay, so we've seen their incredible cities, but what about the people who actually lived in them? What were their values? What did they believe in? The artifacts they left behind, well, they tell a pretty fascinating story. This comparison really gets to the heart of their culture. Sometimes what you don't find is just as telling as what you do. We don't find any grand statues of kings, no massive temples to state gods. What we do find are these small, personal things. Beautiful ornaments made of carnelian and gold, buried with both men and women, which suggest a belief in an afterlife and maybe a more equal society. And instead of a big state religion, we find tons of these little terracotta figurines of a mother goddess, hinting at a focus on fertility and nature. So the main takeaway here is that their spirituality seems to have been deeply personal. There were no giant religious institutions controlling everybody. Worship probably happened right in the home, and it was centered around nature, animals, and fertility symbols. We do find some fire altars at a few sites, but they're small, personal structures, not grand temples. It seems like it was a largely secular society where religion was just a part of life, but it didn't dominate it. So let's try to paint a quick picture of daily life. Society had layers, for sure. You had your rulers or merchants, and then a large class of laborers. Based on the little statues we found, both men and women wore two-piece outfits, kind of like a dhoti and a shawl, and they were stylish. We found evidence of cinnabar used as a cosmetic, plus lipstick and eyeliner. So they clearly had a rich cultural life, they believed in an afterlife, and had a really deep connection to the natural world. I absolutely love this idea. Archaeologists have dug up an incredible number of toys. Little miniature carts, animals on wheels, rattles, whistles, you name it. This wasn't a civilization that was only focused on grim survival or building huge structures. No, they took the time and the resources to create things for the joy and development of their kids. It shows a society that valued childhood and play and family. It's just a beautiful, humanizing little detail. So how did they pay for all of this sophisticated urban lifestyle? Well, they were masters of logistics and trade. Their economy was the engine that powered everything we've seen so far. This table alone just shows how interconnected their world was. We're talking about a globalized economy 4,500 years ago. They were importing precious materials from all over the known world. Gold from South India, copper from Oman, that beautiful blue lapis lazuli stone from the mountains of Afghanistan. They even set up specific outposts, like one in Afghanistan, right near the source of these materials, just to control the supply chain. And this is how they managed their trade by sea. At the port city of Lothal, they built one of the world's earliest known dockyards. It was an absolute marvel of engineering, a massive basin built of baked brick connected to a river that flowed out to sea. It probably had a lock gate system, so ships could come in at high tide and then stay afloat when the tide went out. It's fascinating because Mesopotamian texts from the same period talk about trading with the lands they called Meluha, the land of seafarers, and most experts believe Meluha was the Indus Valley. Okay, this might be the most mind-bending detail of all. Their system of weights and measures was just unbelievably advanced. They used a series of perfectly cut stone weights, usually these little cubes made of a stone called chert, that followed a perfect binary system, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. It's a logical, efficient system that predates binary code for computers by thousands of years. This system allowed for fair, incredibly precise, and standardized trade across their entire civilization. And yet, for all we've figured out, there is one massive secret they have kept from us: their script. We found it on thousands of these small stone seals, and it's made up of about 400 unique symbols. But we can't read it. It's not related to any other script we know of, and because most of the inscriptions are super short, just a handful of signs. We don't have a Rosetta Stone to help us crack the code. The thoughts, the stories, the laws of the Indus people, they're all still locked behind this 4,000-year-old firewall. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most profound mystery of all. Around 1800 BCE, this vibrant, organized, and huge civilization just began to decline. The great cities were slowly abandoned. So what happened? Well, there's no single, easy answer. The truth is probably a mix of all these things. There's really strong evidence for major climate change. The monsoons got weaker, and massive rivers that thousands of people depended on just dried up. Tectonic activity could have caused devastating earthquakes and floods. Now, an older theory about an Aryan invasion has been largely dismissed by most archaeologists, mainly because there's just no evidence of widespread war or destruction you'd expect to see. It's much more likely that a perfect storm of environmental disasters, combined with a breakdown of their trade networks, led to a slow collapse over centuries. The people didn't just vanish. They moved on to smaller, more rural villages to the east and south. So, we end right where we began, with a puzzle. Their script might be unreadable for now, but the cities themselves, they're a kind of text we can read. And they tell a story of a society that valued order, public well-being, and trade way more than war and personal glory. A civilization that became great not through the commands of a single king, but through the cooperation of its people. So maybe the most important secret they left for us isn't actually hidden in their script. Maybe it's written right there in the layout of their streets and the brilliance of their shared water systems. It's a lesson in a whole different way of building a world.